Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The House of Broken Things. Dalton Hall stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, watching his family eat dinner, and felt like a stranger in his own life. At the head of the oak table sat his wife Marlene, cutting precise pieces of perfectly seasoned ribeye steak for their daughter Angel. Across from them, their son Terry hunched over a paper plate containing what looked like leftover scraps from yesterday's meal: cold beans, a piece of stale bread, and some congealed gravy. The contrast wasn't subtle. It never was in the Hall household. Dalton had built this house with his own hands 15 years ago, back when he believed in the American dream of family and prosperity. The construction business had been good to him, good enough to afford the sprawling ranch house on 5 acres outside Millbrook, good enough to give his family everything they could want. But somewhere along the way, everything had gone wrong. "Terry, sit up straight." Marlene's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Just because you're eating slop doesn't mean you have to look like a pig." 8-year-old Terry straightened his shoulders but kept his eyes on his plate. Dalton noticed the boy's hands were shaking slightly, a tremor that had developed over the past year as the household dynamics had shifted. "Mommy, can I have seconds?" Angel asked, her voice sweet and musical. At 10, she had inherited Marlene's sharp features and calculating intelligence, along with something else, a casual cruelty that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. "Of course, sweetheart. There's plenty for my special girl." Dalton watched as Marlene served Angel another generous portion while Terry's plate remained nearly empty. This had become the new normal over the past 18 months, ever since Marlene's parents had moved into the guest house on their property. Cornelius and Dolores Fitzpatrick had arrived under the pretense of helping with childcare, while Dalton worked long hours on construction sites. What they'd actually brought was a toxic philosophy about bloodlines, worthiness, and the natural order of things that had poisoned his family from within. "Daddy's home," Angel chirped, finally noticing Dalton in the doorway. But her smile was perfunctory, practiced, the kind reserved for someone whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. "Hey, princess," Dalton said, forcing warmth into his voice. "How was school?" "Wonderful. Mrs. Patterson said my essay about family values was the best in the class. Grandpa Cornelius helped me write it." Dalton's jaw tightened. He could imagine what kind of family values Cornelius had helped her articulate. "That's great, honey. Terry, how about you? How was your day?" Terry's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his face. It had been weeks since anyone had asked him about his day. "It was okay, Dad. We learned about fractions and math, and I got all the problems right." "Fractions?" Marlene scoffed. "How perfectly appropriate. Terry's always been good with broken pieces." Angel giggled at her mother's joke, and Dalton felt something cold settle in his stomach. When had his daughter learned to laugh at cruelty? The back door opened, and Cornelius Fitzpatrick entered without knocking, a liberty he'd taken upon himself since moving onto the property. At 72, he carried himself with the bearing of old Southern aristocracy, despite the fact that his family had lost their plantation fortune 3 generations ago. What remained was pride, prejudice, and a toxic obsession with bloodline purity. "Evening, Dalton," Cornelius said, his tone suggesting he was addressing hired help rather than the man who owned the house. "I trust the honest labor went well today." The phrase honest labor was always delivered with just enough condescension to make it clear what Cornelius thought of men who worked with their hands. "It went fine," Dalton replied evenly. He learned not to rise to the bait, though every instinct screamed at him to put the old man in his place. Dolores Fitzpatrick shuffled in behind her husband, a woman who had spent so many years nursing grievances that bitterness had carved permanent lines into her face. She surveyed the dinner table with the critical eye of a general inspecting troops. "Angel, darling, you need to eat more vegetables," she said, adding another helping of asparagus to the girl's plate. "Growing girls need proper nutrition." Her eyes flicked to Terry's meager portion and stayed there for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Grandma, why does Terry always get different food?" Angel asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Dalton tensed. waiting to see how the adults would handle this question. This was the moment someone should explain fairness, equality, the importance of treating family members with love and respect. Instead, Marlene reached over and brushed Angel's hair back from her face. Because different people deserve different things, sweetheart. Some people are special, and some people are... She glanced at Terry with barely concealed distaste. Ordinary. But we're both your kids, Terry said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Dalton watched his wife's face harden, saw Cornelius's eyes narrow with something that might have been amusement. Are you questioning your mother? Dolores asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Terry's eyes widened with fear. No, ma'am. You just what? Marlene demanded. You just think you deserve the same treatment as Angel? You think you're entitled to the same privileges? Dalton stepped forward. Marlene, he's 8 years old. He's old enough to understand his place, Cornelius interjected. The boy needs to learn that equality is a myth perpetuated by weak minds. Some are born to lead, others to follow. Some deserve the finest cuts of meat, others. He gestured dismissively at Terry's plate. Others get what they earn. What has an 8-year-old done to earn scraps? Dalton's voice was dangerously quiet. He was born, Dolores said simply. Sometimes that's enough. The cryptic comment hung in the air like smoke, and Dalton felt pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed beginning to click into place. The favoritism, the casual cruelty, the way Marlene had changed after her parents arrived, it all pointed to something deeper and more disturbing than simple preference. I think it's time Terry went to bed, Marlene announced. He looks tired. It was 7:30. Angel regularly stayed up until 9. Terry slid off his chair without protest, his small frame seeming to shrink even further. As he passed Dalton, the boy looked up with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. Good night, Dad. Good night, son. Dalton watched Terry disappear down the hallway, then turned back to find 4 pairs of eyes studying him with varying degrees of calculation and contempt. Is there a problem, Dalton? Marlene asked, her tone challenging. Dalton looked at his wife, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman he'd married. Marlene had always been ambitious, always wanted more than what life had given her, but she'd also been capable of warmth, laughter, love. The woman sitting at his table now was a stranger wearing his wife's face. No problem, he said finally. I need to shower. As Dalton headed for the bathroom, he could hear them resuming their conversation behind him, voices low and conspiratorial. Angel's laughter rang out again, bright and cruel, and he realized that his daughter was being molded into something monstrous right under his nose. In the bathroom, Dalton stared at himself in the mirror and tried to figure out when he'd lost control of his own family. He was 6'3", 230 pounds of muscle and bone, hardened by years of construction work and military service before that. He'd faced down armed insurgents in Afghanistan and never backed down from a fight in his life. But somehow, he'd allowed his own household to be taken over by poisonous influences who were destroying his son's spirit and corrupting his daughter's soul. The man in the mirror stared back at him with cold gray eyes that had seen too much death and dealt out enough violence to know exactly what he was capable of when pushed too far. Dalton Hall had spent the last 18 months trying to be reasonable, trying to keep the peace, trying to believe that things would get better if he just worked harder and provided more. But as he listened to his family's laughter echoing from the kitchen, laughter that excluded one member entirely, he realized that reason and peace were luxuries he could no longer afford. Some problems required more permanent solutions. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The sound that woke Dalton at 2:17 a.m. was unlike anything he'd ever heard. A scream of pure agony that cut through the night like a rusty blade. He was out of bed and moving before his conscious mind caught up, military training kicking in as he sprinted down the hallway toward the source of the sound. What he found in the kitchen would haunt him for the rest of his life. Terry sat on the floor, cradling his right hand against his chest, blood streaming from between his fingers. Marlene stood over him, holding a carpenter's hammer, her face twisted with rage. Angel watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of fascination and satisfaction. What the hell happened? Dalton roared, dropping to his knees beside his son. The boy got greedy, Marlene said, her voice unnaturally calm. Decided he deserved leftovers from Angel's steak dinner. Dalton gently pulled Terry's hand away from his chest and felt his stomach lurch. The boy's ring finger was bent at an impossible angle, clearly broken, with bone visible through torn skin. You broke his finger? With a hammer? Useless boys don't deserve fingers, Marlene replied, setting the hammer on the counter with deliberate precision. Maybe now he'll remember to keep his hands to himself. Behind them, Dalton heard the sound of slow applause. Cornelius had entered the kitchen, still in his pajamas, but wide awake, as if he'd been expecting this show. Excellent lesson, daughter, he said approvingly. The boy needed to understand consequences. Dolores appeared beside him, her cold eyes studying Terry's injury with clinical detachment. Trash gets scraps, she said, spitting the words like a curse. When you reach above your station, you get reminded of your place. Dalton looked up at these people, his wife, his in-laws, even his daughter, and saw something that made his blood run cold. There was no remorse, no shock, no human compassion. They were looking at Terry like he was an animal that had been properly disciplined. Terry, we need to get you to the hospital, Dalton said, scooping his son into his arms. Is that necessary? Marlene asked. It's just a finger. Dalton stared at her with such naked fury that she actually took a step back. You broke our 8-year-old son's finger with a hammer because he was hungry, and you're asking if medical attention is necessary. Our son, Cornelius's voice carried a note of amusement. How presumptuous. The words hit Dalton like a physical blow. He looked from Cornelius to Marlene, seeing something pass between them, a look of shared knowledge that excluded him completely. What did you just say? Angel stepped forward, her young face bright with the excitement of being included in adult secrets. Grandpa Cornelius says Terry isn't really your son, Daddy. Mommy had him with someone else before you got married. That's why he doesn't look like us, and why he doesn't deserve the same things I do. The kitchen went silent, except for Terry's quiet whimpering. Dalton looked down at the boy in his arms, really looked at him, and saw what he'd been blind to for 8 years. Terry had dark hair where the rest of the family was blonde, brown eyes instead of blue, olive skin that never seemed to match either parent. Is it true? Dalton asked Marlene, his voice barely above a whisper. Marlene's chin lifted defiantly. What does it matter? You signed a birth certificate. Legally, he's your responsibility. Legally. Not actually. No, not actually. Dalton felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Not his heart, that had been damaged beyond repair months ago. This was something deeper, something that had to do with identity and belonging and the basic human need to know where you came from. Who's his father? Does it matter? Some construction worker I was seeing before we met. Probably dead by now, knowing the type. The casual cruelty in her voice, the complete dismissal of Terry's biological father, the way she spoke about it in front of the boy himself. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity for Dalton. These people weren't just cruel. They were evil. Terry, Dalton said softly, we're going to the hospital now. And while we're there, we're going to have a long talk about some things. Are you going to send me away? Terry asked, his voice small and scared. Dalton looked into those brown eyes. Eyes that weren't his but belonged to a child who had called him daddy for 8 years, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. No, son, I'm not going to send you away, but some other people might need to find new places to live. You can't throw us out, Dolores snarled. This is our daughter's house. Actually, Dalton said, standing with Terry still in his arms, this is my house, built with my money on land I bought with a mortgage in my name, and I'm starting to think it's time for some spring cleaning. Cornelius stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. You forget yourself, boy. Marlene is a Fitzpatrick. We don't get thrown out by hired help. Dalton set Terry down gently and turned to face Cornelius. The old man was tall, but Dalton was taller. Cornelius had presence, but Dalton had something more dangerous, the kind of controlled violence that came from years of fighting real enemies in real wars. "Let me explain something to you, old man," Dalton said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smart people back down. "You've been living in my house, eating my food, and poisoning my family for 18 months. You've turned my wife into a monster and my daughter into a sociopath. And now you've convinced my wife to break a child's finger with a hammer because he was hungry." Dalton took a step closer, and Cornelius involuntarily backed up. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm taking Terry to the hospital. When we get back, I want you and your charming wife off my property. Permanently." "And if we refuse?" Dolores asked, trying to sound defiant, but not quite managing it. Dalton's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. "Ma'am, I've killed people for a lot less than what you've done to that boy. You really don't want to test my patience." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marlene stepped between them, her face pale but determined. "You can't threaten my parents, Dalton. I won't allow it." "Then maybe you should pack your bags too." Marlene's eyes widened with shock. "You can't be serious. I'm your wife. This is my home. Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've chosen your side, and it's not mine." Dalton picked Terry up again and headed for the door. As he reached the threshold, he turned back to find 4 pairs of eyes watching him with varying degrees of rage and calculation. "By the way," he said conversationally, "Terry might not be my biological son, but he's more family to me than any of you have ever been. And I protect my family." The drive to the hospital gave Dalton time to think, and what he thought about was revenge. Not the hot, impulsive kind that led to mistakes and regrets, but the cold, methodical kind that his military training had taught him to plan and execute with surgical precision. As Terry dozed fitfully in the passenger's seat, his broken finger wrapped in a makeshift splint, Dalton began to formulate a plan that would make the people who had tortured his son understand exactly what real cruelty looked like. They wanted to play games with children's lives? They wanted to break bones and crush spirits? Dalton was about to teach them what those things felt like when they happened to adults. And unlike them, he wouldn't stop at one broken finger. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. The emergency room at Millbrook General was nearly empty at 3 in the morning, which meant Terry was seen immediately. Dr. Lisa Shannon, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands, examined the boy's injury with the careful attention of someone who had seen too many suspicious wounds over the years. "This is a complex fracture," she told Dalton as Terry dozed under mild sedation. The finger was struck with significant force, enough to shatter the bone in multiple places. "It's going to require surgery and several weeks of healing." Dalton nodded, watching his son's peaceful face. Under the influence of pain medication, Terry looked even younger than his 8 years. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Dr. Shannon's expression grew wary. "What is it? Have you ever seen an injury like this from an accident? Something that could happen during normal childhood play?" The doctor was quiet for a long moment, studying Dalton's face as if trying to gauge his intentions. "Mr. Hall, in my 15 years of emergency medicine, I've seen thousands of childhood injuries. Falls, sports accidents, playground mishaps, all kinds of things. But this," she gestured toward Terry's splinted hand, "this is consistent with deliberate trauma. Someone struck this child's finger with a heavy object, probably a hammer or similar tool." "That's what I thought. Mr. Hall, I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse. I'll need to contact Child Protective Services and file a police report." Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "I understand. Do what you need to do." As Dr. Shannon left to make her calls, Dalton sat beside Terry's bed and began making plans. His phone had been buzzing with text messages from Marlene, increasingly frantic demands to know where he was and when he was coming home. He ignored them all. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Leland Collins had been Dalton's commanding officer in Afghanistan, and after retirement, he'd started a private security firm that specialized in what he called unconventional problem solving, the kind of work that left no paper trails and asked no uncomfortable questions. The phone rang twice before Leland's familiar gravelly voice answered. "Jesus, Dalton, it's 3 in the morning. Someone better be dead." Not yet, Dalton replied. But I need a favor. What kind of favor? The kind you're good at. I need complete background checks on 4 people, and I need them fast. I'm talking deep dives, financial records, criminal history, medical records, psychological profiles, the works. That's not exactly legal. Since when has that stopped you? Leland chuckled. Fair point. What's this about? Dalton looked at Terry's sleeping form and felt his resolve harden. Someone hurt my boy. I want to know everything about them before I hurt them back. Understood. Send me the names and details. You'll have everything within 48 hours. Thanks, Lee. I owe you one. You've owed me several since Kandahar. Don't worry about it. As Dalton ended the call, Dr. Shannon returned with a police officer and a social worker in tow. Officer Robert Fuentes was young, probably early 30s, with the alert posture of someone who took his job seriously. The social worker, Grace Kane, looked like she'd seen every form of human ugliness imaginable and had developed protective calluses over her emotions. Mr. Hall, Officer Fuentes began, Dr. Shannon has informed us of the nature of your son's injury. We need to ask you some questions. For the next hour, Dalton told him everything. The favoritism, the emotional abuse, the hammer incident, the revelation about Terry's parentage. He held nothing back, painting a picture of systematic cruelty that made both professionals visibly uncomfortable. Where are the other family members now? Grace asked. At my house. When I left, they were discussing whether Terry's injury was sufficient punishment or if more was needed. Officer Fuentes made notes in his report. We'll need to interview all of them, starting with your wife and daughter. My wife is the one who broke Terry's finger. My daughter watched and laughed. My in-laws encouraged it. Grace leaned forward. Mr. Hall, based on what you're telling us, we're going to need to remove Terry from the home environment until this investigation is complete. No. The word came out with such finality that both professionals looked up in surprise. I'm sorry, Grace said. I said no. Terry isn't going into foster care. He's staying with me. Mr. Hall, we have to consider the child's safety. His safety is my responsibility. The people who hurt him will be removed from my house, not the other way around. Officer Fuentes cleared his throat. Sir, it's not that simple. We have protocols. Your protocols failed to protect him for 8 years, Dalton interrupted. My methods will be more effective. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Grace and Officer Fuentes exchanged glances. Mr. Hall, Grace said carefully, we understand you're angry, but we need to handle this through proper channels. Of course, but while you're handling things through proper channels, I'll be handling them through more direct ones. Before either professional could respond, Dalton's phone rang. Unknown number. Yeah. Mr. Hall? This is Clark Fisher, attorney at law. I represent Cornelius and Dolores Fitzpatrick. Dalton felt a cold smile spread across his face. The old bastards had already lawyered up. That was fast. What can I do for you, counselor? My clients are concerned about the welfare of Angel Fitzpatrick Hall. They're requesting immediate custody pending a full investigation of this alleged abuse situation. Angel Fitzpatrick Hall? Is that what we're calling her now? My clients believe the child would be safer in their care, given your obvious instability and history of violence. Dalton stepped outside the hospital room, leaving the door open so Grace and Officer Fuentes could hear both sides of the conversation. History of violence? That's interesting. What violence would that be? Military records show multiple incidents of excessive force during your service overseas. Combined with your threats against my clients tonight, we believe there's sufficient cause for concern. Your clients broke an 8-year-old boy's finger with a hammer because he was hungry, and you're worried about my stability? Alleged abuse, Mr. Hall. Nothing has been proven yet, but it will be, along with a few other things I'm going to dig up about your clients. Is that a threat? Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. Mr. Fisher, let me explain something to you. Your clients have spent 18 months systematically torturing a child in my home. They've turned my wife into an abuser and my daughter into a sociopath. They've destroyed my family from the inside out. And last night, they crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. He paused, letting the silence stretch. So when you ask if that's a threat, the answer is no. It's a promise. I'm going to destroy them. Counselor. Completely, thoroughly, and permanently. And when I'm done, they're going to wish they'd never heard the name Terry Hall. Mr. Hall, I strongly advise you to. Dalton hung up and walked back into the hospital room, where Grace and Officer Fuentes were staring at him with expressions of concern and growing alarm. Gentleman, lady, he said pleasantly, I think we should accelerate our timeline. Terry's going to need protection, and the people who hurt him are already mobilizing their resources. Mr. Hall, Grace said slowly, what exactly are you planning to do? Dalton looked down at Terry, who was starting to wake up from his sedation. The boy's eyes found his immediately, full of trust and love despite everything that had happened. I'm going to be a father, Dalton said simply. The kind Terry should have had from the beginning. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say in front of law enforcement and social services, was that being Terry's father meant protecting him from the people who wanted to hurt him, by any means necessary, even if it meant becoming the monster they claimed he already was. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Preparation. Dalton's construction company occupied a sprawling compound on the outskirts of Millbrook, complete with warehouses, equipment yards, and a main office building that had served as his operational headquarters for 12 years. But the real nerve center of his business was the underground bunker he'd built beneath the main warehouse, a climate-controlled facility that officially didn't exist. 48 hours after Terry's surgery, Dalton sat in that bunker reviewing the files Leland Collins had compiled on the Fitzpatrick family. What he found was even worse than he'd expected. Cornelius Fitzpatrick had a history of fraud dating back 30 years. Real estate schemes, insurance scams, and tax evasion that had somehow never resulted in prosecution. More disturbing were the sealed juvenile records that Leland had managed to access, showing a pattern of cruelty to animals and younger children that had followed Cornelius through his teenage years. Dolores Fitzpatrick had been institutionalized twice for what medical records euphemistically called nervous breakdowns. The actual diagnoses were more specific: antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic tendencies. She'd been released both times after family members, specifically Cornelius, had convinced doctors she was stable enough for outpatient treatment. But it was Marlene's file that made Dalton's blood run cold. The woman he'd married had been married twice before, both marriages ending in suspicious circumstances. Her first husband had died in a hiking accident that insurance investigators had found questionable but not prosecutable. Her second husband had simply disappeared, leaving behind a suicide note that handwriting experts later determined was forged. Terry wasn't the only child Marlene had abandoned. She'd given birth to 3 other children by 3 different fathers, all of whom had been given up for adoption or surrendered to state custody when they became inconvenient. Angel, it seemed, was special not because she was Marlene's daughter, but because she was Cornelius's granddaughter and possibly his biological daughter as well. DNA tests referenced in sealed court documents suggested a relationship that went far beyond the normal grandfather-granddaughter bond. Dalton closed the files and sat back in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. He wasn't just dealing with garden-variety family dysfunction. He was dealing with multiple generations of psychopaths who had perfected the art of manipulation and abuse. His phone rang. Terry's voice came through the speaker, small and worried. Dad, when are you coming home? Soon, buddy. How are you feeling? My hand hurts, but the nice lady from social services is here, and she's asking lots of questions. She wants to know about the hammer thing. Dalton's grip tightened on the phone. What have you told her? The truth. That mommy hit me because I asked for food. Dad, am I in trouble? No, son. You're not in trouble. You did exactly the right thing by telling the truth. The lady says I might have to go stay somewhere else while they figure things out. I don't want to go away, Dad. You're not going anywhere, Terry. I promise. After ending the call, Dalton activated the secure communication system he'd installed in the bunker and placed a call to Santos Griffin, a man whose services were both highly illegal and completely necessary for the kind of operation Dalton was planning. Santos, it's Dalton Hall. I need to activate a priority contract. What's the scope? Full elimination package. For targets, multiple locations. Needs to look accidental. Timeline, 72 hours from start to finish. Santos was quiet for a moment. That's aggressive, even for us. It's going to cost extra. Money isn't an issue, but I need guarantees. No traces, no survivors, no loose ends. Understood. Send me the files. As Dalton uploaded the Fitzpatrick information to Santos's encrypted server, he felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. The law might move slowly, but justice could be much more efficient when properly motivated. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know you're planning something. Back off, or Angel disappears forever. Dalton smiled and typed back. Bring it on, old man. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The response came immediately. Neither do you. Check your email. Dalton opened his laptop and found a message with video attachments. The first video showed Angel sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly at the camera with cold, calculating eyes that were far too old for her 10-year-old face. Hi, Daddy, she said, her voice sweet and innocent. Grandpa Cornelius says you're being very unreasonable about Terry. He says maybe you need some motivation to be more cooperative. The second video made Dalton's blood turn to ice water. It showed Terry asleep in his hospital bed, filmed through the window from outside the building. A timestamp showed it had been recorded less than an hour ago. The third video was even more disturbing. Angel stood in Terry's hospital room, looking down at the sleeping boy with an expression of pure malice. It would be so easy, she whispered to the camera. All it would take is unplugging one little machine or pressing the wrong button on his forged rip. Poor Terry, so weak and helpless. The video ended with Angel blowing a kiss to the camera. Dalton was out of his chair and moving before the video finished playing. He speed-dialed Leland Collins while grabbing weapons from the concealed arsenal he kept in the bunker. Lee, I need an immediate extraction team at Millbrook General. My son is in danger. How immediate? Right fucking now. And Lee? Rules of engagement are weapons free. Anyone who poses a threat to the boy gets eliminated. Copy that. Team will be on site in 15 minutes. Dalton's next call was to Santos Griffin. Change of plans. The timeline just moved up to immediate. I don't care what it costs or how messy it gets. I want the Fitzpatrick family eliminated within the next 6 hours. All of them. Dalton thought about Angel's cold eyes, her whispered threats, the casual way she discussed killing Terry. All of them, he confirmed. As Dalton raced toward the hospital, he felt the last vestiges of his civilized nature burning away like paper in a fire. The Fitzpatricks had made a fundamental error in judgment. They'd assumed that threatening Terry would make Dalton more cooperative. Instead, they just signed their own death warrants. The war they'd been fighting in shadows and whispers was about to become very real, very violent, and very final. And unlike them, Dalton didn't fight with psychological games and manipulation. He fought to win. Chapter 5. The Fortress Under Siege. The private security team Leland had deployed around Millbrook General was invisible to casual observers, but immediately apparent to anyone with military training. Dalton counted 6 operatives as he approached the hospital, 2 in the parking lot, 2 at entrances, and 2 roving patrols. Professional, well-armed, and completely focused on protecting one small boy in a third-floor room. But as Dalton entered the hospital, his combat instinct screamed that something was wrong. The normal flow of late-night hospital activity was too quiet, too controlled. Staff members moved with the mechanical precision of people following a script rather than responding to organic situations. Dr. Shannon met him at the elevator, her face pale and strained. Mr. Hall, thank God you're here. We've had some unusual visitors tonight. What kind of visitors? Official ones. CDC representatives claiming there's been a potential exposure to a communicable disease. They've quarantined Terry's floor and are requiring all personnel to follow special protocols. Dalton felt ice form in his stomach. CDC? What kind of exposure? That's just it. They won't give us any specifics. Just that Terry may have been exposed to something during his time at home, and they need to run additional tests. As the elevator climbed toward the 3rd floor, Dalton processed the implications. The Fitzpatricks had somehow managed to manufacture an official government response that would give them access to Terry while keeping everyone else at a distance. The elevator doors opened to reveal a scene that confirmed his worst fears. The entire floor had been cordoned off with plastic sheeting and warning signs. Personnel in hazmat suits moved through the corridors with the slow precision of people working in a contaminated environment. "Where's my son?" "Room 314. "But Mr. Hall, you'll need to go through decontamination procedures before." Dalton was already moving, pushing through the plastic barriers with the kind of controlled violence that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Shannon calling for security, but he knew his own people would handle any interference. Room 314 was at the end of the corridor, isolated from the other patient rooms by additional barriers and warning signs. Through the observation window, Dalton could see Terry lying in bed, unconscious, with multiple forelines running into his small body. A figure in a hazmat suit stood beside the bed, adjusting one of the 4 drips. Dalton kicked in the door. The person in the hazmat suit spun around, and even through the protective mask, Dalton could see Angel's bright blue eyes staring back at him with cold amusement. "Hello, Daddy. You're just in time to say goodbye. Get away from him. Or what? You'll hurt a 10-year-old girl? In front of all these witnesses." Angel gestured toward the observation window, where several medical personnel had gathered to watch the confrontation. Dalton stepped closer, and Angel's hand moved to the 4 control panel. "Did you know that potassium chloride is completely undetectable in postmortem blood work if you don't know to look for it?" Poor Terry, already so weak from his injuries. His little heart just couldn't handle the stress. "Angel, don't do this." "Why not? You never loved me the way you love him. Even before you knew he wasn't your real son, you always chose him over me. Well, now you get to watch him die and know that it's all your fault." Angel's finger hovered over the 4 pump controls. One push would send a lethal dose of potassium directly into Terry's bloodstream. "You're right," Dalton said quietly. "I never loved you the way I love him." Angel's eyes flashed with triumph. Finally, some honesty. "Because Terry is good and innocent and pure. And you," Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper, "you're a monster, just like your real father." Angel's hand stilled on the controls. "What did you say?" "Cornelius. Your biological father. I found the DNA tests, Angel. I know what he did to your mother when she was 14. I know what he's been doing to you." For the first time since he'd known her, Angel's mask of cold control slipped. Confusion and pain flickered across her features. "You're lying." "I'm not. And deep down, you know I'm not. You know why you're different from other children. You know why you feel things differently, why hurting people doesn't bother you the way it should." Angel's hand began to shake. "Shut up. He made you into this, Angel. Cornelius and Dolores and your mother. They broke you before you were old enough to understand what was happening. You're not evil because you were born that way. You're evil because they made you that way." Tears began streaming down Angel's face behind the hazmat mask. I can't. Yes, you can. You can choose to be different. You can choose to protect Terry instead of hurting him." Angel looked down at the 4 controls, then at Terry's peaceful face, then back at Dalton. "But if I don't do this, Grandpa will be angry. He said he'd make me go away forever if I don't prove I'm worthy." "Fuck Grandpa. Fuck all of them. You're 10 years old, Angel. You shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone." Angel's finger moved away from the controls. She looked at Dalton with eyes that suddenly seemed very young and very lost. "Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I'm scared too." The observation window exploded inward as Leland Collins and his team breached the room from the outside. Within seconds, the space was filled with tactical operators in full combat gear. "Target neutralized," Leland reported. "Area is secure." But Dalton was already moving, scooping Angel into his arms despite the hazmat suit she wore. She felt impossibly small and fragile, nothing like the calculating monster who had threatened Terry's life moments before. "Sir," one of the operatives reported, "we've got multiple bogies approaching from stairwells. Looks like the CDC response was cover for a larger operation." Through the broken window, Dalton could see vehicles approaching the hospital from multiple directions. The Fitzpatricks had marshaled significant resources for what was meant to be the final elimination of both children. Lee, I need extraction for all three of us. Now, copy that. Roof access in 60 seconds. As alarms began blaring throughout the hospital, Dalton carefully disconnected Terry from the legitimate medical equipment while leaving the 4 lines that Angel had been using to deliver poison. His son was unconscious but breathing normally. Whatever they'd given him was meant to keep him docile, not kill him outright. Angel, Dalton said, lifting Terry in his arms, we're going to run now. And when we get somewhere safe, you're going to tell me everything about what they've done to you. All of it. Angel nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Will you still love me? Even though I'm bad. Dalton looked into those blue eyes, Cornelius's eyes, and saw not a monster, but a damaged child who had been systematically tortured into becoming something unnatural. You're not bad, Angel. You're broken, and broken things can be fixed. As they ran toward the stairwell that would take them to the roof and safety, Dalton realized that his war with the Fitzpatricks had evolved beyond simple revenge. Now it was about salvation. And unlike the games they'd been playing with psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes, salvation required the complete and utter destruction of everyone who had contributed to Angel's corruption. The Fitzpatricks wanted to play God with children's lives? Dalton was about to show them what real divine justice looked like. Chapter 6. Revelations in Blood. The safe house was a converted hunting lodge 50 miles outside Millbrook, buried deep enough in the pine forest that satellites couldn't get clear imagery and cell phone signals died at the property line. Dalton had purchased it years ago through a shell company, ostensibly as a weekend retreat, but actually as a bolt hole for situations exactly like this one. Terry slept in the master bedroom, monitored by medical equipment that Leland's team had appropriated from the hospital during their extraction. Whatever the Fitzpatricks had given him was wearing off, but slowly. Angel sat curled in a chair beside his bed, still wearing hospital scrubs and watching her brother's face with an expression of guilt and confusion. In the main room, Dalton reviewed the intelligence his team had gathered during the hospital raid. The fake CDC response had been coordinated by Cornelius using contact from his decades of financial fraud, people who specialized in creating official-looking documentation for a price. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Isolate Terry, eliminate him using untraceable methods, then claim Angel had been traumatized by witnessing his death from the mysterious exposure. But what disturbed Dalton more than the murder plot was what they'd found in the fake medical equipment. Along with the potassium chloride Angel had been instructed to use, there were syringes filled with what laboratory analysis revealed to be concentrated LSD and methamphetamine. The plan wasn't just to kill Terry. It was to drive Angel insane in the process, creating a witness who would be too psychologically damaged to ever testify coherently about what had happened. Sick bastards, Leland muttered, reading over Dalton's shoulder. Using kids as weapons is bad enough, but this... They've been doing it for years, Dalton replied, showing him Angel's medical records. Look at this. 3 different psychiatric hospitalizations before she turned 8, all for violent outbursts, all followed by periods where she was kept sedated with experimental drugs. They were conditioning her, training her, breaking down her natural empathy, and rebuilding her as a weapon they could point at anyone who threatened them. Dalton's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Santos Griffin. Package delivered. Fitzpatrick compound neutralized. 2 primary targets eliminated. 1 secondary target secured for interrogation. Which one did you keep alive? Dalton typed back. The old woman. Client specified maximum information extraction before disposal. Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dolores Fitzpatrick had always been the cruelest of the 3 adults, the one who seemed to take the most pleasure in Terry's suffering. If anyone deserved an extended conversation about consequences, it was her. Angel, he called softly. Can you come here for a minute? Angel looked up from Terry's bedside, her young face still streaked with dried tears. Is he going to be okay? He's going to be fine. But I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Angel approached slowly, her movements carrying the hyper-vigilant caution of someone who had learned that adults could turn violent without warning. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. You're safe now. But I need to understand what they did to you, so I can make sure it never happens again. For the next hour, Angel told Dalton things that made him understand why some people believed in hell. The systematic abuse had started when she was 3 years old, psychological conditioning designed to make her view cruelty as normal and kindness as weakness. Cornelius had used a combination of rewards and punishments to shape her behavior, praising her when she hurt others and withdrawing affection when she showed compassion. The sexual abuse had started when she was 5. The drug experiments had begun at 6. By the time she was 8, Angel had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. A perfectly programmed sociopath who could mimic emotions but not feel them, who understood manipulation but not love, who knew how to inflict pain but not how to experience genuine pleasure. They said I was special, Angel whispered, her voice hollow. They said normal people were weak, and I was strong because I could do things they couldn't do. What kinds of things? Hurt people without feeling bad about it. Lie without getting nervous. Watch someone cry and not want to help them. Dalton felt something break inside his chest. Angel, you know that's not normal, right? You know that feeling bad when you hurt someone is actually a good thing. Angel nodded slowly. I think I used to know that before, but it's been so long since I felt anything real that I forgot what it was like. Do you want to remember? Can I? Or am I broken forever? Dalton looked into those blue eyes, Cornelius's eyes, and saw something that gave him hope. Behind the calculated coldness, behind the programmed responses, there was still a spark of something genuine, something that could be nurtured back to life with enough time and care. Nobody's broken forever, Angel, but it's going to take work and it's going to hurt sometimes. Are you willing to try? Angel nodded, and for the first time since he'd known her, her expression looked authentically hopeful. What about Grandpa and Grandma and Mommy? When they find out I didn't kill Terry, they're going to be very angry. Dalton's smile was gentle, but his eyes were absolutely merciless. Angel, you don't need to worry about them anymore. They're never going to hurt you or Terry or anyone else ever again. What happened to them? Justice. Before Angel could ask for clarification, Dalton's secure phone rang. Santos Griffin's voice came through the encrypted connection, professional and emotionless. Target Dolores is ready for client interview. Location secure, privacy guaranteed. Dalton looked at Angel, who was watching him with the sharp intelligence that had made her such an effective weapon. Angel, I need to go take care of some business. Leland is going to stay here with you and Terry. If you need anything at all, you tell him, okay? Are you going to hurt Grandma Dolores? The question was asked with clinical curiosity rather than emotional concern, and Dalton realized that Angel's recovery was going to be a long and complicated process. I'm going to have a conversation with her about the things she's done, and then I'm going to make sure she can never do them again. Angel nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. Can I come with you? No, sweetheart. That's not something you need to see. But I want to watch. I want to see what happens to people who hurt children. The request was delivered in a tone of innocent curiosity that made Dalton's skin crawl. Even knowing what had been done to her, even understanding that she was a victim rather than a perpetrator, Angel's casual approach to violence was deeply disturbing. Angel, one of the things we're going to work on is understanding the difference between justice and revenge. Justice is about protecting people and making sure bad things don't happen again. Revenge is about making people suffer because it feels good. What are you going to do to Grandma? Justice, Dalton said firmly. And you're going to stay here and take care of Terry, because that's what good sisters do. As Dalton prepared to leave, Angel's voice stopped him at the door. Daddy, yeah. Thank you for not giving up on me. Dalton looked back at the damaged child who had nearly murdered her brother just hours before, and felt his resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. I will never give up on you, Angel. No matter what you've done, no matter what you might do, you're my daughter, and I love you. Angel smiled, the first genuine expression of joy he'd ever seen on her face. I love you too, Daddy. For real this time. As Dalton drove toward his final confrontation with Dolores Fitzpatrick, he reflected on the strange mathematics of justice. 3 adults had systematically tortured and corrupted 2 children over the course of years. 2 of those adults were already dead. The third was about to learn what it felt like to be completely helpless and at the mercy of someone stronger. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. And unlike the games the Fitzpatricks had played with psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes, balance required absolute finality. Chapter 7. The Last Confession. The abandoned grain silo stood like a concrete monument to decay on the outskirts of the county, its bulk casting long shadows across fields that had been fallow for 20 years. Santos Griffin had chosen the location for its acoustic properties. Sound didn't carry, and the thick walls muffled even the loudest screams. Dalton found Dolores Fitzpatrick exactly where Santos had left her, suspended by her wrist from a chain that disappeared into the shadows above. At 70 years old, she looked fragile and pathetic hanging there in her blood-stained nightgown, but Dalton felt no pity. This woman had orchestrated the systematic torture of children for decades. "Hello, Dolores." Her head snapped up, eyes focusing on him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Despite her situation, she still carried herself with the arrogant bearing of someone who believed she was inherently superior to the people around her. "You can't do this," she gasped, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I'm an old woman. I have rights. So did Terry. So did Angel. So did all the other children you've destroyed over the years." Dalton circled her slowly, cataloging the damage Santos had already inflicted. Professional work. Painful enough to ensure cooperation, but not so severe as to cause unconsciousness or shock. "I found the records, Dolores. All of them. Hospital admissions, juvenile court documents, Child Protective Services reports going back 40 years. You and Cornelius have been in the business of breaking children for longer than I've been alive. Those children were problems. Defective. We were trying to fix them. Fix them? You turned your own daughter into a serial killer. You conditioned your granddaughter to be a sociopathic weapon. You convinced my wife to torture an 8-year-old boy because he was hungry." Dolores's laugh was bitter, unrepentant. Marlene was always weak. She needed guidance to reach her full potential. Her full potential was breaking a child's finger with a hammer. Her full potential was understanding that some people matter and others don't. That bloodlines determine worth. That strength means being willing to eliminate weakness wherever you find it. Dalton felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Even now, even hanging helpless and broken, Dolores showed no remorse, no recognition that what she'd done was evil. She was a true believer in her own twisted philosophy. Where are the other children? What other children? Dalton picked up a pair of bolt cutters from the table Santos had prepared. "Dolores, I've read the records. Marlene gave birth to 4 children before Angel. 3 of them disappeared from official records after being placed in your care. I want to know where they are." "Dead," she said simply. "They were defective, weak. They served their purpose and were disposed of." "What purpose?" "Practice. Angel needed subjects to work with as her training progressed. The others were expendable." Dalton had thought himself prepared for the depths of the Fitzpatrick family's evil. But this casual admission of child murder made him understand that he was dealing with something beyond simple cruelty. This was organized, systematic genocide against anyone the family deemed unworthy of life. "How many children have you killed?" "Killed? We improved them. We gave their meaningless lives purpose by using them to create something better." The bolt cutters closed around Dolores's ring finger with a wet crunch. Her scream echoed off the concrete walls like the cry of a damned soul. "How many?" 17, she gasped between sobs. 17 over 30 years. Foster children, mostly. Runaways. Children no one would miss. And Angel participated. Angel was our masterpiece. By the time she was 7, she could inflict more psychological damage than most adults. She had a gift for finding exactly what someone feared most and using it against them. Dalton moved the bolt cutters to her middle finger. What was the plan for Terry? The plan was to break him completely, then use him as Angel's final test. If she could kill someone she'd lived with for years without feeling remorse, she would have been ready for larger operations. Larger operations? Missing persons cases, unsolved murders, people who disappear without a trace because someone with Angel's skills decided they were unnecessary. The middle finger joined the ring finger on the concrete floor. Dolores's voice had become a continuous whimper punctuated by gasps of pain. What about the plan for me? You were an obstacle. Marlene never loved you, you know. She married you for your money and your property, but she always intended to eliminate you once your usefulness ended. Ow! Hunting accident. You were going to be found dead on your own property, killed by a stray bullet during deer season. Very tragic. Very accidental. And then what? And then Marlene would inherit everything, take Angel, and disappear. We had new identities prepared, new lives arranged. Angel would have grown up to be perfect, beautiful, intelligent, completely without conscience. Dalton set down the bolt cutters and picked up a medical scalpel from Santos's collection of tools. Dolores, I want you to understand something. You're going to die here tonight. That's not a threat or a negotiation. It's a simple fact. The only question is how much you suffer before it happens. You can't murder an old woman in cold blood. You're not like us. You're right. I'm not like you. Dalton's voice was quiet, conversational. You torture children because you enjoy it. I'm going to torture you because you deserve it. The scalpel found the soft skin at the base of her throat, drawing a thin line of blood without severing anything vital. Tell me about Angel's training. For the next hour, Dolores told Dalton things that would have broken a weaker man's sanity. The systematic psychological conditioning, the sexual abuse masked as lessons about power dynamics, the drug experiments designed to enhance Angel's natural sociopathic tendencies. By the time she was 8 years old, Angel had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human, a perfect predator with the appearance of an innocent child. The beautiful part, Dolores whispered, her voice growing weak from blood loss, was that she enjoyed it. By the end, Angel looked forward to her lessons. She begged us to let her practice on new subjects. Because you programmed her to enjoy it. Because we unlocked her true nature. Deep down, everyone is a predator. We just had the courage to embrace that truth. Dalton stepped back and studied Dolores's ruined form. She was dying slowly, blood pooling beneath her suspended body, but her eyes still held that cold certainty that she was right and the rest of the world was weak. Any last words? Angel will never be normal. You can try to fix her, but the programming goes too deep. Sooner or later, she'll revert to what we made her. And when she does, she'll kill you first. Dalton considered this, then nodded slowly. Maybe, but at least she'll have the choice. That's more than you ever gave her. The final cut was quick and merciful. More mercy than Dolores Fitzpatrick had ever shown a child in her 70 years of life. As Dalton walked away from the grain silo, leaving behind the corpse of the last Fitzpatrick family member, he felt a strange sense of completion. The immediate threat to his children was over. The people who had tormented Terry and corrupted Angel would never hurt anyone again. But as he drove through the darkness toward home, Dolores's final words echoed in his mind. Angel's recovery would be a long and uncertain process. The damage done to her psyche ran deeper than any physical wound, and there was no guarantee that love and patience would be enough to heal it. Still, he had to try, because unlike the Fitzpatricks, Dalton believed that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses, even if that choice had to be made every day for the rest of their lives. Even if the alternative was becoming the very monsters they'd fought so hard to defeat. Chapter 8. The Reckoning's Price. 6 months after the grain silo, Dalton stood in the kitchen of his rebuilt home, watching his children eat breakfast together for the first time in their lives. Terry's right hand was still weak from the surgery to repair his finger, but he could grip a fork well enough to eat scrambled eggs. Angel sat across from him, carefully cutting her pancakes into precise squares and studying her brother's face with the intense focus of someone learning to read human emotions for the first time. "Terry," Angel said suddenly, her voice carrying the careful cadence of someone practicing conversation, "I want to say I'm sorry again. For what I almost did at the hospital. Terry looked up from his eggs, his brown eyes serious but not afraid. The boy had a remarkable capacity for forgiveness that Dalton both admired and worried about. I know you're sorry, Angel, and I forgive you. But Terry hesitated, searching for words. Why did you want to hurt me? Angel set down her fork and considered the question with the same methodical approach she once brought to planning cruelties. Because they taught me that hurting people meant I was strong, and being strong meant I was good. But I think they were wrong about that. How do you know they were wrong? Because when I was going to hurt you, I felt empty inside, like I was just a machine doing what I was programmed to do. But when Daddy said he still loved me even though I was broken, I felt something different, something that made me want to be better instead of just being strong. Dalton felt his chest tighten with pride and sorrow. Angel's recovery was progressing, but it was a fragile thing built on conscious choice rather than natural instinct. Every day, she had to decide to be human instead of the weapon the Fitzpatricks had created. Dad, Terry said, Dr. Shannon wants to know if we're ready to go back to school next week. Are you ready? Terry shrugged with the resilience of childhood. I guess. But Angel says she's scared. Dalton looked at Angel, who was staring down at her plate with the expression of someone wrestling with thoughts too complex for her age. What are you scared of, sweetheart? I'm scared that when other kids are mean to me, I'll remember how to be mean back. Really mean, and I won't be able to stop myself. It was a legitimate fear. Angel's psychological conditioning had been thorough, and stress could trigger relapses into her programmed responses. But isolation wasn't the answer. She needed to learn how to function in normal social situations. We'll take it slow, Dalton said. Start with half days, build up gradually. And if you feel those old thoughts coming back, you can find me immediately. Angel nodded, but Dalton could see the doubt in her eyes. She wanted to be normal, but she didn't trust herself to stay that way. Dalton's phone rang, displaying Detective Emmett Church's number. Church had been the lead investigator on the Fitzpatrick case, and while he'd never found enough evidence to pursue charges related to their deaths, he'd been helpful in sorting out the legal aftermath. Morning, Detective. Dalton, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station? What's this about? New information about your case, and some questions that need answering. An hour later, Dalton sat across from Detective Church in an interview room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Church was a good cop, thorough, fair, and smart enough to know when he was dealing with something bigger than a small-town department could handle. The FBI crime lab finished analyzing the Fitzpatrick property. Church began setting a thick file on the table between them. What they found: Jesus, Dalton, I've been a cop for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like it. What kind of thing? Bodies. 17 of them, buried in various locations around the compound. Children, mostly, ranging in age from 6 to 14, all showing signs of systematic torture and abuse. Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dolores had been telling the truth about the scope of their crimes. Any identification on the victims? That's the thing. Most of them were never officially reported missing. Foster kids who aged out of the system, runaways from broken homes, children whose disappearances were written off as voluntary departures. Church opened the file and spread out crime scene photographs that made Dalton's stomach clench despite everything he'd seen and done. The FBI profiler thinks we're looking at 3 generations of organized killers. A family business built around child trafficking, torture, and murder. The scale of it is unprecedented. What do you need from me? Church leaned back in his chair and studied Dalton's face with the calculating gaze of someone trying to read a suspect. I need to understand how you knew to look for this. Your initial report mentioned systematic abuse, but you seem to know there were deeper crimes involved. How? Dalton had prepared for this question. Military intelligence training. I learned to recognize patterns of organized criminal behavior. And your response was to immediately secure your children and disappear into the woods. My response was to protect my family by any means necessary. Church nodded slowly. Understandable. But here's what bothers me, Dalton. 3 people died in what appears to be a professional hit. Cornelius and Marlene were found shot execution style, and Dolores disappeared completely. Someone with serious skills and serious resources wanted the Fitzpatrick family eliminated. Maybe someone else figured out what they were doing. Maybe. Or maybe someone decided to handle the problem through extrajudicial means. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Church knew, or at least suspected, that Dalton had been involved in the Fitzpatrick's deaths. But knowing and proving were two different things. Detective, are you questioning me as a witness or as a suspect? I'm questioning you as a father who had every reason to want these people dead, and who has the skills to make that happen without leaving evidence. Dalton met Church's gaze steadily. Those people tortured my son and turned my daughter into a weapon. If I'd killed them, I wouldn't lose a minute of sleep over it. But you're saying you didn't? I'm saying that justice took care of the problem. How it happened is less important than the fact that it did happen. Church closed the file and sat back. The FBI wants to interview Angel about her experiences with the family. They think she might have information about other victims or accomplices. Absolutely not. Dalton, she's the only living witness to. She's a 10-year-old girl who's trying to recover from systematic psychological torture. I won't have federal agents traumatizing her all over again for the sake of an investigation. What if there are other children out there? Other victims who could be saved? Dalton considered this. It was possible that the Fitzpatricks had accomplices, other family members or associates who were continuing their work. But Angel's mental health had to be the priority. I'll talk to her. If she remembers anything that could help other children, I'll contact you immediately. But no official interviews, no depositions, no courtroom testimony. Church nodded reluctantly. Fair enough. But Dalton, if you know something about how the Fitzpatricks died, now will be the time to share it. The FBI isn't going to be as understanding as I am. I appreciate the warning, detective, but some stories are better left untold. As Dalton drove home, he thought about the delicate balance he was trying to maintain. His children were safe, the immediate threat was over, and the truth about the Fitzpatrick's crimes was finally coming to light. But Angel's recovery was fragile, and any disruption could trigger a relapse into her programmed responses. The federal investigation would continue, and eventually, more questions would be asked. But by then, Dalton hoped, Angel would be strong enough to handle the truth about what her family had done, and what he had done to stop them. Until then, he would do what he'd always done, protect his children by any means necessary, even if it meant keeping secrets that could destroy them all. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 1 year later, Dalton stood in the doorway of Angel's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time since he'd known her. Gone were the night terrors, the violent outbursts, the calculating coldness that had made her seem far older than her years. In sleep, she looked like what she was, an 11-year-old girl who was finally learning how to be a child. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. Months of intensive therapy, careful medication to rebalance brain chemistry damaged by years of abuse, and constant vigilance to prevent relapses into programmed behaviors. But slowly, incrementally, Angel was becoming human again. She'd made her first real friend at school 3 months ago, a shy girl named Rosa who shared Angel's love of reading and seemed immune to the social dynamics that confused and frustrated Angel. Watching them together, Dalton could see Angel practicing empathy like someone learning a foreign language, carefully observing Rosa's emotional responses and trying to mirror them. It was artificial at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Terry had adapted with the remarkable resilience of childhood, though he still flinched sometimes when adults raised their voices unexpectedly. The physical therapy for his hand was progressing well, and Dr. Shannon predicted he'd have full function within another year. More importantly, the psychological damage seemed to be healing. Terry was laughing again, playing with other children, showing interest in normal 8-year-old activities. But it was the relationship between the siblings that gave Dalton the most hope. Angel had appointed herself Terry's protector with the same methodical dedication she'd once brought to planning cruelties. When bullies targeted Terry for his damaged hand, Angel intervened with calculated precision. Not violence, but psychological manipulation that left the aggressors uncertain and unsettled. She was using her weapons for protection instead of destruction. "Dad, Terry's voice came from behind him. The boy stood in the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, buddy. Just checking on your sister. She was crying earlier, during dinner. Crying? Happy crying, I think. When you told her about the college fund you set up. She went to her room after, and I heard her crying, but when I asked if she was okay, she said she was just feeling grateful. Dalton felt his chest tighten with emotion. Angel's tears had been one of the last things to return as her emotional range expanded. For months, she'd been unable to cry even when she wanted to, her natural responses suppressed by years of conditioning. The fact that she could now experience and express gratitude was a milestone worth celebrating. Terry, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay, are you happy here? With Angel and me? Do you feel safe? Terry considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. I feel safer than I ever have. And Angel, she's different now. Better. She takes care of me instead of trying to hurt me. Do you forgive her? For what she almost did at the hospital. I forgave her a long time ago, Dad. She was sick then, and now she's getting better. People shouldn't be punished forever for things they did when they were sick. The wisdom in those words, coming from a 9-year-old boy who had every reason to hold grudges, reminded Dalton why Terry was worth protecting at any cost. What about me, Terry? Do you forgive me for not protecting you better from the beginning? Terry's expression grew puzzled. Forgive you for what? You saved us. You got rid of the bad people and kept Angel and me safe. But I should have seen what was happening sooner. I should have stopped it before it got so bad. Terry stepped forward and hugged Dalton with the fierce devotion that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Dad, you did everything right. You just had to figure out who the real bad guys were first. As they stood together in the hallway, Angel's door opened and she emerged, hair mussed from sleep and eyes bright with the intelligence that had once been used as a weapon. Are we having a family meeting without me? She asked, her tone carrying the light sarcasm she'd been experimenting with as her personality developed. Just checking on everyone before bed, Dalton said. Angel studied his face with the perceptiveness that remained her most pronounced characteristic. You're worried about something. What is it? Dalton had learned not to lie to Angel. Her ability to detect deception was too refined, and honesty was crucial to maintaining the trust that formed the foundation of her recovery. Detective Church called earlier. The FBI investigation into your grandparents' crimes is expanding. They might want to interview you at some point. Angel's face went through a series of micro-expressions as she processed this information. Fear, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked like resolution. Will you be there with me? Every second. Will they try to make me go back to being the way I was before? No, sweetheart. They just want to understand what happened so they can help other children who might be in similar situations. Angel nodded slowly. I think I'd like to help other children. If I can. Are you sure? It might be difficult to talk about those things. I'm sure, because now I know the difference between hurting people and helping them. And I want to choose helping. Terry reached for Angel's hand, and she took it without hesitation. Another milestone in her journey back to humanity. We'll do it together, Terry said. Like a family. Like a real family, Angel corrected. The kind that protects each other instead of hurting each other. As Dalton tucked his children back into their beds, he reflected on the strange mathematics of justice and redemption. 3 evil people had died to save 2 innocent ones. A lifetime of programming had been slowly, carefully undone through love and patience. A damaged child was learning to choose humanity over the monstrous nature she'd been given. It wasn't a perfect solution. Angel would always carry scars from her early conditioning, and there would be moments when her old responses surfaced. Terry would always remember the cruelty he'd experienced, even if he chose to forgive it. And Dalton would always know that he'd crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. But they were alive, they were safe, and they were learning to be a real family. That was more than he'd dared hope for during those dark months when the Fitzpatricks had seemed untouchable. As Dalton settled into his own bed, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The children of monsters don't have to become monsters themselves. Thank you for proving that. SG. Santos Griffin, checking in from whatever shadows he now occupied. The message was deleted immediately, but its meaning lingered. Dalton had saved 2 children from becoming the weapons their abusers intended. In doing so, he'd probably saved countless others from becoming their future victims. The ripple effects of stopping generational evil were impossible to calculate, but they were undoubtedly significant. Outside, a winter storm was beginning to develop, but inside the rebuilt Hall house, 3 people slept peacefully under one roof. A father who had chosen to become a protector instead of a predator, and 2 children who were learning that love was stronger than the darkness that had tried to claim them. It wasn't the ending Dalton had expected when he'd first discovered his family's betrayal. It was better, because unlike revenge, redemption created something new instead of just destroying what was broken. And sometimes, in a world full of monsters, that was the only victory that mattered. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vincent Morrison had built his life on 3 unshakable principles: loyalty, family, and consequence. At 42, he owned a private security firm that specialized in personal protection for high-profile clients, work that had taught him to read people like open books and to trust his instincts above all else. His imposing 6'3" frame and steely gray eyes had intimidated many, but those closest to him knew the fierce protectiveness that drove every decision he made. He'd met Linda Hartwell 12 years ago at his brother's wedding. She was the maid of honor, radiant, charming, with auburn hair that caught the light just so, and a laugh that seemed to draw everyone into her orbit. Linda worked as a physical therapist at the time, helping accident victims rebuild their lives. It was that compassion, that apparent dedication to healing others, that had first attracted Vincent to her. Their courtship had been swift but intense. Within 8 months, they were married in a ceremony that Linda had insisted be extravagant, far beyond what Vincent's practical nature would have chosen, but he'd wanted her happy. 2 years later, their son Mason was born, a bright-eyed boy who inherited his father's analytical mind and his mother's quick wit. Vincent had built them a life most would envy. Their home in the affluent Riverside Hills neighborhood featured every luxury Linda desired. He'd encouraged her to leave physical therapy once Mason was born, wanting her to have the freedom to pursue whatever made her happy. She'd taken up tennis, joined the country club, and immersed herself in the social circles of suburban wives. But over the past 2 years, Vincent had noticed changes. Linda had become distant, frequently checking her phone and stepping away to take calls. She'd started spending more time at the country club, often returning home well after dinner with elaborate explanations about charity events and women's group meetings. Her affection toward both Vincent and Mason had cooled, replaced by a kind of irritated tolerance. Vincent's business instincts had whispered warnings, but he'd silenced them. This was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman who'd promised to stand by him through everything. He'd chosen to trust rather than investigate, a decision that would soon prove to be his greatest mistake. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in October. Mason had been riding his bike in their neighborhood when a speeding car had struck him at the intersection near their home. Vincent received the call while reviewing security protocols with a client. The words critical condition and emergency surgery had shattered his world in an instant. He'd driven to the hospital with hands trembling for the first time in years, his mind cycling through every worst-case scenario. Mason, his brilliant 10-year-old son who wanted to be a detective just like his dad, was fighting for his life. The doctors explained that Mason had suffered severe head trauma and internal injuries. The next 48 hours would be crucial. Vincent had called Linda immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. He'd tried 3 more times during the harrowing first night as Mason underwent surgery after surgery. Each time, no answer. It wasn't until the next evening, nearly 24 hours after the accident, that Linda finally appeared at the hospital. She'd rushed into the ICU waiting room wearing a tennis outfit, her hair perfectly styled, not a trace of the frantic worry Vincent would have expected from a mother whose child was fighting for his life. Her explanation, that she'd been at a spa retreat with friends and hadn't checked her phone, had struck Vincent as odd, but in his exhaustion and fear, he'd pushed the doubts aside. Now, as he sat beside Mason's bed on the third day, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest connected to machines that kept him alive, Vincent felt something cold settling in his chest. Linda had left the hospital that morning, claiming she needed to handle some urgent matters at home. She'd barely touched Mason's hand, barely looked at the monitors that tracked their son's fragile hold on life. Vincent studied his son's pale face, so young and peaceful despite the trauma his small body had endured. Mason was all that mattered now. Everything else, every doubt, every warning sign he'd ignored, could wait. But deep in the recesses of his mind, Vincent Morrison was beginning to compile a list of questions that would soon demand answers. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The call came on the fourth day, just as the afternoon light was beginning to fade through the hospital room windows. Vincent had been reading to Mason, hoping his voice might somehow reach through the sedation and medical haze. The doctors had cautiously mentioned that Mason was showing signs of improvement, but he remained unconscious. Vincent, Linda's voice on the phone carried that particular tone he'd learned to recognize, the one she used when she wanted something and expected compliance. "How is he?" she asked, though Vincent noted she didn't wait for a complete answer before continuing. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something important." Vincent glanced at Mason's still form, the bandages around his head, the 4 lines threading into his small arms. "I'm here with our son, Linda. Whatever it is can wait." "No, it can't wait. Tomorrow is my cousin Brielle's birthday party. It's been planned for months, and I need you to help prepare. The whole family will be there, and—" Vincent felt something snap inside his chest. "Are you serious right now? Don't take that tone with me. I know Mason is your priority, but life doesn't stop because of this. Brielle specifically asked for you to handle the photography setup. You know how good you are with cameras, and our son is in the ICU." Vincent's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet that anyone who knew him would have recognized as a warning. "He nearly died 3 days ago. He's still unconscious, and you're talking about a birthday party?" "The doctor said he's stable now. And honestly, Vincent, you sitting there staring at him isn't going to make him wake up any faster. This family event is important to me. Brielle has always been like a sister to me, and missing her 30th birthday would be unforgivable." Vincent closed his eyes, trying to process what he was hearing. In 12 years of marriage, he'd seen Linda's selfish tendencies, her need to be the center of attention, her talent for making every situation somehow about her. But this was beyond anything he'd imagined. "I can't," he said simply. "This isn't the time." There was a pause, and when Linda spoke again, her voice had turned cold, calculating. "Vincent, I'm not asking. I'm telling you. If you don't come tomorrow and help make this party perfect, I'll file for divorce." The words hit him like a physical blow, not because of the threat itself, but because of what it revealed about the woman he'd married. Standing in that sterile hospital room, watching machines keep his son alive, Vincent finally saw Linda with perfect clarity. She was threatening to destroy their marriage unless he abandoned their critically injured child for a party. "Let me make sure I understand," Vincent said, his voice carrying a deadly calm that would have terrified anyone who truly knew him. "You're threatening to end our marriage unless I leave our son's bedside to help you with party decorations. Don't be dramatic. He's sedated anyway. He won't even know you're gone." That was the moment, the precise instant when Vincent Morrison's love for his wife died completely, replaced by something far more dangerous. He built his career on reading people, on understanding their motivations and capabilities. And in that moment, he finally understood exactly who Linda was. Without another word, he ended the call. Then, with deliberate precision, he deleted her number from his phone. He turned off the device entirely and placed it in his jacket pocket. Whatever Linda chose to do next, whatever threats she made or actions she took, Vincent was done. He pulled his chair closer to Mason's bed and took his son's small hand in his own. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered. "Daddy's here. Daddy's not going anywhere." The next evening, as Linda was presumably celebrating at her cousin's party, Vincent remained exactly where he belonged. He'd spent the day talking to Mason, reading his favorite books aloud, and researching every detail of his son's treatment with the focused intensity that had made him successful in business. He'd also made some phone calls, not to Linda, but to contacts in his network, people who specialized in investigations, people who could find answers to questions Vincent had been too trusting to ask before. Because Vincent Morrison was many things: protective, ruthless when threatened, and absolutely relentless when someone harmed his family. But he was not, and had never been, a fool. He'd simply chosen to love and trust his wife despite the warning signs. That choice was over now. The man who would emerge from this hospital room would be someone Linda had never truly known, and someone she would come to fear with every fiber of her being. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Mason's eyes fluttered open on the sixth day, just as the morning sun cast golden rectangles across the hospital floor. Vincent had been dozing in the uncomfortable chair beside the bed when he heard the soft whisper of his name. "Dad!" Vincent was instantly alert, his heart hammering as he leaned forward to take Mason's hand. "I'm here, son. I'm right here." Mason's voice was weak, his words slightly slurred from the medications, but his eyes were clear and focused. "The accident. I remember. Don't worry about that now," Vincent said gently, pressing the call button for the nurses. "You're safe. You're going to be okay." But Mason shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Dad, I need to tell you something. About Mom." Something in his son's tone made Vincent's blood run cold. "Mason, you don't need to. I got hurt because Mother told me to go to the store." Mason's words came out in a rush, as if he needed to get them out before he lost the courage. "She said she needed medicine for her headache, but she couldn't go because Uncle Trevor was coming over." Vincent felt the world tilt around him. Trevor Morrison, his own younger brother, Mason's uncle, the man who'd been best man at their wedding. "Uncle Trevor?" Mason nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I wasn't supposed to tell. Mom said it was our secret, that Uncle Trevor was helping her with a surprise for you. But Dad, they were kissing and touching each other like married people do." The machines around Mason's bed seemed to fade into white noise as Vincent processed what his son was telling him. Linda and Trevor, his wife and his brother. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. "Mom sent me to get medicine so they could be alone," Mason continued, his young voice carrying guilt that no child should bear. "I was supposed to take the bike path, but I was upset and took the shortcut through the street instead. That's when the car hit me." Vincent's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained gentle for his son's sake. "Mason, listen to me carefully. None of it, is your fault. Do you understand?" Mason nodded, but Vincent could see the weight his son was carrying. "I heard them talking before I left. Uncle Trevor was mad about something, said he was tired of hiding. Mom was crying and saying she needed more time." The final pieces clicked into place in Vincent's mind with crystal clarity. Linda's recent distance, her mysterious phone calls and lengthy absences, her complete lack of emotional response to Mason's accident, the spa retreat excuse that had never quite made sense. And now, the ultimate insult: threatening divorce if he didn't abandon their injured son to help her maintain appearances at a family gathering. A nurse entered the room, followed quickly by Dr. Patricia Wells, who began examining Mason with gentle professionalism. Vincent stepped back, giving them space to work, but his mind was racing far beyond the hospital room. "Remarkable recovery," Dr. Wells murmured as she checked Mason's pupils and reflexes. "The swelling has reduced significantly, and his cognitive responses are excellent. We'll want to keep him for observation for another few days, but this is very encouraging." Vincent nodded, managing to smile for Mason's benefit, but inside him something fundamental had shifted. The protective father who'd spent days praying for his son's recovery was still there, but he was now joined by something far more dangerous, a man who'd been betrayed by the two people he'd trusted most in the world. After Dr. Wells left and Mason drifted back to sleep, Vincent walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. 3 stories below, he could see his black Mercedes, the same car he'd driven frantically to the hospital 6 days ago when he'd still believed his world was intact. His phone, silent for the past 2 days, showed 17 missed calls from Linda and 4 from Trevor. He read through Linda's increasingly frantic voicemails, concern about his silence, then anger about missing the party, then attempts at manipulation about working through their problems. Trevor's messages were more direct. "We need to talk. Linda told me what happened. This isn't what you think. Call me back, Vincent." Vincent deleted every message without responding. Then he scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in over a year. Anthony Russo, a private investigator who'd worked security details for some of Vincent's most demanding clients. Anthony specialized in cases that required absolute discretion and thoroughness. The call was answered on the second ring. "Russo Investigations. Anthony, it's Vincent Morrison. I need to hire you for something personal." "Vincent, of course. What do you need?" "Complete surveillance and background on 2 subjects. Financial records, communications, travel patterns, everything. I want to know what they've been doing, where they've been going, and who they've been talking to for the past year." "Understood. Who are the subjects?" Vincent watched his reflection in the window glass, noting the cold determination in his own eyes. "My wife, Linda Morrison, and my brother, Trevor Morrison." There was a pause. Anthony had worked with Vincent long enough to know this wasn't a request made lightly. "How deep do you want me to go?" "All the way to the bottom, Anthony. No limits, no boundaries. I want to know everything. You'll have preliminary findings within 48 hours. Vincent ended the call and returned to Mason's bedside. His son was sleeping peacefully now, the color already returning to his cheeks. Whatever came next, Vincent would make sure Mason was protected from all of it. But Linda and Trevor, they would face the full consequences of their choices. Vincent Morrison had built his reputation on understanding that every action had repercussions, and betrayal carried the highest price of all. The war was about to begin, and Vincent intended to win completely. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. Anthony Russo's preliminary report arrived exactly 48 hours later, delivered by encrypted email to Vincent's secure business account. Vincent read it in the hospital cafeteria during one of Mason's scheduled rest periods, and what he discovered made his blood turn to ice. The affair between Linda and Trevor had been going on for 14 months. Anthony had uncovered credit card records showing shared hotel visits, joint trips disguised as separate business travel, and hundreds of text messages between burner phones. But the details that cut deepest were the personal ones. Intimate photos, love letters, and planning documents for what they'd apparently started calling their real life together. More damaging still were Trevor's financial records. Vincent's brother had been systematically embezzling from their family construction business, the company their father had built and left to both sons. Trevor had been siphoning money into offshore accounts, apparently planning to disappear with Linda once they'd accumulated enough to start fresh somewhere else. But the revelation that made Vincent's jaw clench with fury was a recorded phone conversation Anthony had obtained from 3 weeks ago. Linda's voice was crystal clear. "Once Vincent finds out about us, he'll probably try to take Mason away. We need to be prepared for that. Maybe it would be better if something happened to eliminate the custody issue entirely." Trevor's response had been just as chilling. "You mean something permanent?" "I'm just saying accidents happen, especially to little boys who don't watch where they're going." Vincent had to step outside the hospital to process what he'd just read. His wife and brother hadn't just betrayed him. They'd potentially orchestrated their own son's near-death experience. The accident that had nearly killed Mason might not have been an accident at all. He called Anthony immediately. "I need surveillance recordings from the intersection where Mason was hit. Traffic cameras, security footage from nearby businesses, everything. Already working on it. I should have those files by tomorrow." "And Anthony?" "Expand the investigation. I want to know everything about both of them. Debts, associates, weaknesses. Everything that could be useful." Vincent spent the next 2 days maintaining perfect normalcy on the surface while building his case underneath. He continued caring for Mason, who was recovering remarkably well and would be discharged within the week. To any observer, Vincent appeared to be nothing more than a devoted father focused entirely on his son's health. But during Mason's sleeping hours and therapy sessions, Vincent was meeting with lawyers, accountants, and other specialists. He consulted with Detective Ray Castellano, a former police investigator who now worked private cases for Vincent's security firm. Ray specialized in building airtight cases that could withstand any legal scrutiny. "You want to be very careful here, Vincent," Ray warned during their meeting at a downtown diner. "If you're right about them orchestrating the accident, we're talking about attempted murder of child. That's not something you handle privately. I'm not interested in letting the courts handle this, Ray. I want them destroyed completely, but I want it done in a way that looks like natural consequences." Ray studied Vincent's face carefully. They'd worked together for 8 years, and he'd never seen this level of cold determination in his friend. "What exactly are you planning?" "Trevor's been stealing from the family business. That stops now, and he pays back everything with interest. Linda wants a divorce. She'll get one, but she'll walk away with nothing. And if they did engineer Mason's accident..." Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow sounded more threatening than any shout. "Then they'll understand what real consequences look like." The traffic camera footage arrived that evening, and what it revealed confirmed Vincent's worst suspicions. The car that had struck Mason hadn't been speeding by accident. The driver had actually accelerated toward the crosswalk where Mason was crossing. More damning still, a license plate search revealed the vehicle was registered to a shell company that traced back to one of Trevor's business associates. Vincent now had proof of attempted murder. But instead of taking the evidence to police, Vincent began planning something far more comprehensive. He spent the night drafting what he privately called the Trevor Protocol, a systematic plan to strip his brother of everything he valued while exposing his crimes in the most publicly humiliating way possible. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 would target Trevor's finances and reputation within their shared business community. Phase 2 would destroy his relationship with Linda by revealing the extent of his criminal activities to her. Phase 3 would be the final reckoning, a confrontation that would leave Trevor with nothing but the knowledge that his own actions had caused his downfall. For Linda, Vincent had something even more personal in mind. She wanted to play games with their marriage. Vincent would show her exactly what happened when someone tried to manipulate a man who understood power better than she ever could. On Mason's final day in the hospital, Linda finally appeared for what she claimed would be a family discussion. She arrived wearing a new designer dress and jewelry Vincent didn't recognize, her manner combining false concern for Mason with barely concealed irritation at Vincent's continued silence. "We need to talk about us," she announced after giving Mason a perfunctory kiss on the forehead. "This silent treatment is childish, Vincent. I know you're upset about the party, but there is no us anymore, Linda." Vincent's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "File for divorce whenever you want. My lawyer will be in touch with the settlement terms." Linda's eyes flashed with triumph, clearly believing she'd won. "Good. I was hoping you'd be reasonable about this." "Oh, I'm going to be very reasonable," Vincent agreed, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll find me extremely reasonable." As Linda left the hospital that afternoon, confident in her victory, she had no idea that Vincent Morrison had just declared war. And in war, Vincent had never lost a single battle. Chapter 5. The Perfect Trap. Vincent spent Mason's first week home from the hospital establishing the perfect facade of a man resigned to his fate. He hired Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, a highly recommended private nurse, to help with Mason's recovery while he handled the divorce proceedings. To Linda, he appeared defeated, going through the motions of their separation with bitter acceptance. What Linda didn't know was that Mrs. Fitzgerald had previously worked security for Vincent's firm and was documenting everything that happened in their home. Every conversation, every visitor, every phone call Linda made was being recorded through sophisticated surveillance equipment Vincent had installed throughout the house. The recordings from just the first 3 days were devastating. Linda had invited Trevor over within hours of Vincent supposedly giving up, and their conversations revealed the full scope of their plans. They discussed selling the house immediately, moving the offshore money to untraceable accounts, and starting fresh in Costa Rica, where they believed Vincent couldn't touch them. But more damning were the details about Mason's accident. In a moment of drunken confidence, Trevor had boasted about how easy it had been to arrange. "Your boy getting hurt was the perfect excuse for Vincent to be out of the picture," he'd said. "And if he'd been hurt worse, well, single mothers get a lot more sympathy than divorced wives." Vincent listened to the recording 3 times, his hands steady despite the rage building inside him. They hadn't just betrayed him, they tried to murder his son for convenience. Whatever happened next, they had earned every moment of suffering he was about to deliver. The first phase of Vincent's plan launched during the second week. Trevor arrived at the Morrison construction offices Monday morning to find the locks changed and federal investigators waiting with a search warrant. Vincent had provided them with detailed financial records showing the embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraud Trevor had been committing for over a year. "I don't understand," Trevor had called Vincent, panic clear in his voice. "Why would you turn me in? We're family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to steal from our father's company," Vincent replied calmly. "The FBI is very interested in your offshore accounts, by the way. Turns out hiding money from the IRS is still illegal." While Trevor scrambled to find lawyers and damage control, Vincent was already implementing Phase 2. He arranged for Linda to receive copies of Trevor's arrest records, his financial crimes documentation, and, most importantly, recordings of Trevor bragging about having other women in 3 different cities. Linda's call came within an hour of receiving the package. "Vincent, we need to talk. Something terrible has happened with Trevor." "I know all about Trevor," Vincent said simply. "I've known for weeks." There was silence on the line. Then Linda's voice came back smaller, more uncertain. "What do you mean?" I know about the affair. I know about the embezzlement. I know about the accident." Each word was delivered with surgical precision. "I know everything, Linda. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and my brother have been planning to destroy my family, steal my money, and move to Costa Rica. Unfortunately for both of you, I'm much better at this than you are." Vincent could hear Linda's breathing becoming rapid and panicked. "What do you want?" "I want you to pack a suitcase and be out of my house by noon tomorrow. The divorce papers will grant you exactly what you deserve. Nothing. You can keep whatever you can fit in that suitcase." "You can't do this. I have rights." "You had rights when you were my wife. You gave those up when you decided to have my son nearly killed for your convenience." Vincent's voice remained calm, but the words carried the weight of absolute finality. "Noon tomorrow, Linda. Don't be late." The next morning, Vincent watched from Mason's bedroom window as Linda loaded 2 suitcases into her car, her face streaked with tears and fury. She kept looking up at the house, clearly hoping Vincent would change his mind or come outside to negotiate. He didn't. Mason, propped up in bed reading, looked up at his father. "Is Mom really leaving forever?" "Yes, she is." "Are you sad?" Vincent considered the question carefully. Was he sad? The man who'd loved Linda Hartwell was sad, but that man had died in a hospital room a week ago. The man who'd taken his place felt only cold satisfaction at seeing justice served. "No, buddy, I'm not sad. People who hurt our family don't get to stay in our family." Mason nodded seriously, wise beyond his 10 years. "Like Uncle Trevor?" "Exactly like Uncle Trevor." That afternoon, Vincent received a call from Detective Castellano. "Trevor Morrison posted bail 2 hours ago. Word is he's been trying to contact Linda, but she's not answering her phone. She's probably figured out that he's been lying to her about everything else too," Vincent observed. "What's his next move likely to be?" "My guess. He's going to come looking for you. Men like your brother don't go down quietly, especially when they think they've been betrayed." Vincent smiled grimly. "Good. I've been waiting for him to make that mistake." Because Phase 3 of Vincent's plan required Trevor to come to him. And when he did, Vincent would be ready to finish what his brother had started the day he'd decided that harming a child was an acceptable price for his greed. The final confrontation was coming, and Vincent Morrison intended to win it permanently. Chapter 6: The Reckoning Approaches. Trevor Morrison made his predictable move on a Thursday evening, just as Vincent had calculated he would. Desperate, facing federal charges and abandoned by Linda, he came to the family home looking for someone to blame for his downfall. Vincent had been expecting him. Mrs. Fitzgerald had taken Mason to his grandmother's house for a sleepover, leaving Vincent alone to handle what was coming. The security system Vincent had installed captured Trevor's arrival, drunk, angry, and carrying what appeared to be a baseball bat from his truck. Vincent watched through the security monitors as Trevor stumbled up the front walkway, muttering to himself. The external microphones picked up fragments, ruined everything. My own brother should have finished the job. When Trevor started pounding on the front door, Vincent was ready. Vincent, open this door. We need to settle this like men. Vincent opened the door calmly, noting Trevor's bloodshot eyes and the reek of alcohol. His younger brother had always been the volatile one, quick to anger and slower to think. That predictability had made planning this confrontation remarkably simple. Hello, Trevor. You look terrible. You son of a bitch. Trevor raised the bat, but Vincent was faster, stepping aside as Trevor's drunken swing left him off balance. Vincent caught his brother's wrist and twisted, sending the bat clattering across the entryway floor. That was a mistake, Vincent said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Trevor stumbled backward, suddenly realizing he'd badly miscalculated. Vincent had always been the bigger, stronger brother, but Trevor had forgotten that Vincent's security work kept him in peak physical condition. You destroyed my life, Trevor shouted. Linda was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I didn't do anything to your life, Trevor. You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided to steal from our family business. Vincent advanced slowly, and Trevor backed toward the living room. I just made sure there were consequences. The money was as much mine as yours. The money you stole wasn't from the business profits, Trevor. You've been embezzling from client accounts. Money that belonged to other people who trusted us. Vincent's voice carried cold contempt. Our father built this company on integrity, and you turned it into your personal piggy bank. Trevor's face flushed with rage and shame. Dad always liked you better anyway. You got everything handed to you, while I had to scrape for whatever. Stop. Vincent's command cut through Trevor's rant like a blade. Don't you dare bring our father into this. He died believing you were a man of honor. Honor? Trevor laughed bitterly. What honor is there in watching your older brother get everything while you get scraps? Linda understood that. She saw how you treated me, how you always had to be the successful one, the perfect one. Linda understood that you were a useful idiot with access to money, Vincent interrupted. She's been playing you for 14 months, Trevor. Every promise she made, every plan you thought you two had together, it was all manipulation. Vincent pulled out his phone and played one of the recorded conversations from the previous week. Linda's voice filled the room. Trevor's so desperate to prove himself that he'll do anything I suggest. The money laundering, the offshore accounts, even arranging the accident. He actually thinks I respect him for it. Trevor's face went white as he heard his lover's words. You doctored that. You're lying. Vincent played another recording, this one from just 3 days ago. I never loved Trevor. How could I? He's weak, criminal, and honestly not very bright. But he was useful for getting Vincent out of the picture. Once the divorce is final and I have my settlement, I'll disappear and let Trevor deal with his legal problems alone. Trevor sank into a chair, the fight going out of him as he realized the full scope of how thoroughly he'd been used. She said she loved me. She said we were going to start over together. She used you to steal money and try to kill my son, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences for that? The accident was her idea. I just arranged the car. I never wanted Mason to actually get hurt that badly. Vincent went very still. You just confessed to attempted murder. Trevor looked up, sudden panic in his eyes as he realized what he'd just admitted. Vincent, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. Vincent pulled out his phone again, this time showing Trevor that their entire conversation had been recorded. I understand that you and Linda conspired to have my 10-year-old son killed for money. Trevor tried to stand, but Vincent was already moving. Years of protection work had taught him how to restrain dangerous individuals efficiently and permanently. Trevor found himself face down on the hardwood floor with Vincent's knee pressed against his spine. "Here's what's going to happen," Vincent said calmly, ignoring Trevor's struggles. "You're going to prison for embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion, and attempted murder. You'll serve 15 to 20 years if you're lucky. You can't prove the murder attempt. I have recordings of you confessing. I have financial records of you paying the driver. I have traffic camera footage of the accident. And now I have you confessing again on tape." Vincent applied slightly more pressure, and Trevor gasped. "I can prove everything." Vincent stood up, leaving Trevor gasping on the floor. "But here's the thing, Trevor. Prison is just the beginning. You tried to kill my son, and that means you've made an enemy who will never, ever forget." "What do you mean?" Vincent smiled, and Trevor finally understood the true danger he was in. This wasn't the protective older brother he'd grown up with. This was someone far more dangerous, a man with resources, connections, and an absolute commitment to revenge. "I mean that for the rest of your life, wherever you go, whatever you try to build, I'll be there to tear it down. Every job you apply for, every relationship you start, every moment of peace you think you've found, I'll be there to remind the world exactly what you are." Trevor tried to crawl away, but Vincent caught his ankle. "And Trevor, Linda's going to face the same justice. She's already discovered that all her credit cards have been canceled, her bank accounts frozen, and her passport flagged. She's trapped, alone, and about to learn what happens to people who threaten my family." As Vincent called the police to report an intruder who'd confessed to attempted murder, Trevor Morrison finally understood that he'd declared war on the wrong man. And this war was about to end with his complete and permanent destruction. Chapter 7. The Final Justice. The next 3 weeks unfolded exactly as Vincent had orchestrated. Trevor was denied bail after the recording of his confession was presented to the court, and Linda found herself trapped in a legal nightmare that stripped away every advantage she'd thought she possessed. Vincent's lawyer, Rebecca Cross, was a specialist in high-stakes divorce cases who took particular satisfaction in destroying manipulative spouses. She'd reviewed all of Vincent's evidence and constructed a legal strategy that would leave Linda with nothing while ensuring she faced criminal charges for her role in Mason's attempted murder. "She's trying to claim she was coerced by Trevor," Rebecca informed Vincent during their meeting. "Her attorney is arguing that she was a victim of manipulation and had no real involvement in the criminal conspiracy." Vincent smiled coldly. "Show them the recordings from last Tuesday." Rebecca played the audio file Vincent had provided. Linda's conversation with a man named Carlos Mendez, whom she'd been secretly meeting while supposedly devastated about her marriage's end. In the recording, Linda was clearly planning to access hidden assets and flee the country once the heat died down. "I love how she thought she was so clever," Rebecca observed, "trying to play the victim while secretly planning her escape. The prosecution is going to have a field day with this." Linda's attempts to claim innocence collapsed when faced with the overwhelming evidence Vincent had accumulated. The recordings of her planning Mason's accident, her knowledge of Trevor's embezzlement, and her attempts to hide assets all painted a picture of a woman who was far from the victim she claimed to be. But Vincent's revenge went deeper than just legal consequences. He'd used his network of contacts to ensure that Linda's reputation was destroyed throughout their entire social circle. The country club expelled her for moral turpitude. Her closest friends received anonymous packages containing transcripts of her most damning recorded conversations. Every bridge she'd ever built was systematically burned. The coup de grace came when Vincent arranged for Linda's own family to learn the truth about her character. Her cousin Brielle, the same cousin whose birthday party had triggered Linda's divorce threat, received copies of recordings where Linda mocked Brielle as a pathetic spinster who throws elaborate parties because she has no real life. Within a week, Linda found herself completely isolated, facing serious criminal charges and financially destitute. Her desperate attempts to contact Vincent for mercy went unanswered. Vincent was focused entirely on Mason's continued recovery and the rebuilding of their lives. His son was thriving, both physically and emotionally, and had shown remarkable resilience in the face of everything that had happened. "Dad, do you think Uncle Trevor is sorry for what he did?" Mason asked one evening as they worked on a puzzle together. Vincent considered the question carefully. "I think Trevor is sorry he got caught, buddy. But being sorry you got caught is different from being sorry you hurt someone." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "Like when kids at school say sorry, but they don't really mean it?" "Exactly like that. I'm glad he's gone," Mason said quietly. "And I'm glad Mama's gone too. They made everything feel scared and angry all the time." Vincent felt a surge of protective love for his son. Despite everything Mason had endured, he was becoming a stronger, more perceptive child. The trauma hadn't broken him. It had revealed his inner strength. The final courtroom scenes played out with devastating efficiency. Trevor was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge specifically noted the calculated cruelty of targeting a child for financial gain. Linda received 12 years for conspiracy and accessory charges, though Vincent suspected she'd serve the full sentence. Prison had a way of being particularly harsh to people who harmed children, and word had a way of spreading about what inmates were inside for. As Vincent watched them both being led away in shackles, he felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a cold sense of completion. Justice had been served, consequences had been delivered, and the threats to his family had been permanently eliminated. But Trevor made one final mistake. As he was being escorted from the courtroom, he looked directly at Vincent and mouthed words that the security cameras would later clearly capture. "This isn't over." Vincent smiled then, the first genuine emotion he'd shown in months, because Trevor still didn't understand who he was dealing with. Even from prison, Trevor apparently thought he could continue to threaten Vincent's family. That night, Vincent made a phone call to contacts who specialized in ensuring that prison could be a very educational experience for inmates who needed to learn important lessons about consequences. Trevor Morrison would discover that Vincent's reach extended far beyond the courtroom, and that some wars never truly end. They just move to different battlefields. Chapter 8: Prison Lessons. Trevor Morrison's first month in federal prison taught him several important lessons. The most significant was that his older brother's influence extended far beyond the civilian world he'd known. It started with small things. His commissary orders consistently arrived incomplete or spoiled. His cell assignments kept changing, always to locations with problematic cellmates. Guards seemed to lose his request forms and forget to relay his messages. Mail delivery became sporadic at best. But the real education began when Trevor was approached by Marcus Webb, a lifer who controlled most of the prison's internal economy. Marcus was a soft-spoken man whose quiet demeanor masked a ruthlessly efficient intelligence network. "Trevor Morrison," Marcus said during their first conversation in the prison yard, "you're the one who tried to have a kid killed for money." Trevor tried to appear confident. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus smiled patiently. "See, that's interesting, because I have some friends on the outside who told me all about you. How you worked with that woman to arrange for a 10-year-old boy to get hit by a car. How you did it for money and a piece of tail that didn't even respect you. Who told you that? Let's just say your brother has friends in interesting places." Marcus's smile never wavered. "And those friends wanted to make sure everyone here understood exactly what kind of man you are." The conversation was a revelation for Trevor. Vincent hadn't just destroyed his life legally. He'd arranged for Trevor's imprisonment to be a daily reminder of the consequences of his choices. Every day brought new humiliations, new demonstrations that, even behind bars, Vincent's reach was absolute. Meanwhile, Linda was learning similar lessons in the women's federal facility 3 states away. Her attempts to maintain her appearance and social status were systematically undermined by accidents and oversights that left her looking haggard and desperate. But Vincent's true masterstroke came 6 months into their sentences. Through carefully orchestrated channels, both Trevor and Linda received the same message. Vincent Morrison had adopted a new identity and disappeared with Mason, leaving no forwarding address. They would serve their full sentences knowing that when they were released, they would never be able to find or threaten Vincent's family again. The message was a lie, of course. Vincent and Mason had simply moved to a new house in a different part of town and continued their lives. But the psychological impact on Trevor and Linda was devastating. They faced the next 11 years knowing that their crimes had not only destroyed their freedom, but had also permanently severed any possibility of finding Vincent and Mason when they were released. Trevor's breaking point came 8 months into his sentence. During a supervised phone call, he managed to reach one of Vincent's old business numbers. "Vincent, please, I'm begging you. I've learned my lesson. I'm sorry for everything." "Trevor." Vincent's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I'm surprised to hear from you. Please, you have to call off whatever you've arranged in here. I can't take much more of this." "Call off what?" "I haven't arranged anything, Trevor. What you're experiencing are just the natural consequences of your choices. People know what I did to Mason. They know about the accident." "Of course they do. Attempted child murder is public record. I'm not responsible for how other inmates react to that information." Trevor was crying now, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "I'll do anything. I'll sign over everything. I'll admit to whatever you want. Just please." "Trevor, you already confessed to everything on tape. You already signed over everything when the courts seize your assets. There's nothing left for you to offer me. Then what do you want?" Vincent's voice dropped to the quiet, dangerous tone Trevor had learned to fear. "I want you to serve every single day of your sentence, knowing that you tried to murder my son for money. I want you to wake up every morning and go to sleep every night remembering that your greed and weakness nearly killed a 10-year-old boy." "Vincent, please. And I want you to understand that when you're eventually released, you'll be a registered felon with no money, no family, no friends, and no future. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you destroyed everything good you ever had for a woman who never respected you and money you were too stupid to enjoy." The line went dead, and Trevor Morrison finally understood that his war with Vincent had been over before it started. He'd brought a knife to a gunfight, and Vincent had spent months ensuring that the defeat would be permanent and complete. In her own facility, Linda received a similar call that same day. Her conversation with Vincent lasted exactly 90 seconds and ended with her screaming threats and obscenities into a disconnected phone line. That night, both Trevor and Linda learned that threatening Vincent Morrison's family, even from prison, carried additional consequences. The next morning, they were both transferred to maximum security facilities where communication with the outside world became almost impossible. Vincent set down his phone and returned to helping Mason with his homework. His son was excelling in his new school, making friends easily, and showing no signs of lasting trauma from his ordeal. "Dad, was that Uncle Trevor on the phone?" Mason asked without looking up from his math problems. "Yes, it was." "Did he say he was sorry?" Vincent considered the question. He said the words, but they didn't mean anything. Some people only say sorry when they want something, not because they actually feel bad about what they did. Mason nodded seriously. "I'm glad we don't have to see him anymore." "You never will," Vincent assured him. "Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt." As Vincent looked at his son, healthy, happy, and safe, he felt complete satisfaction with the choices he'd made. Justice had been served, consequences had been delivered, and the future belonged entirely to him and Mason. The war was over, and Vincent Morrison had won it completely. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 2 years after the trials, Vincent Morrison stood in the kitchen of their new home, watching Mason play basketball in the backyard with his best friend Jake. At 12, Mason had grown tall and strong, with no physical limitations from his injuries and a maturity that impressed every adult who met him. The house was smaller than their previous home, but felt infinitely more peaceful. Vincent had chosen the location carefully, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who value privacy. He'd also implemented security measures that were invisible but comprehensive, ensuring that Mason would always be safe without feeling like he lived in a fortress. Dr. Sarah Chun, Mason's therapist, had pronounced him remarkably well-adjusted during their final session the previous month. "He's processed the trauma in a very healthy way," she told Vincent. "Children are often more resilient than we expect, especially when they have a strong support system." Vincent had built that support system carefully. Mrs. Fitzgerald had become like family, serving as both caregiver and confidant for Mason. Mrs. Morrison, Vincent's mother, had moved closer and spent several days a week with her grandson. A circle of trusted friends and neighbors provided additional layers of security and normalcy. The construction business had been rebuilt from the ground up under Vincent's sole control. All of Trevor's contamination had been methodically removed, and the company now operated with integrity that would have made their father proud. Vincent had hired Detective Ray Castellano as head of security, and the business had expanded into corporate consulting with impressive success. But the most significant change was in Vincent himself. The man who had emerged from the hospital ICU 2 years ago was harder than the man who had entered it, but he was also more focused on what truly mattered. He'd learned to distinguish between people who deserve his trust and those who merely demanded it. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Vincent opened it to find Detective Ray Castellano holding a manila envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this," Ray said, stepping into the house. Vincent opened the envelope and found photographs from federal prison surveillance cameras. Trevor looked haggard and thin, his face bearing scars that suggested his imprisonment had been exactly as educational as Vincent had intended. In the photos, he was being transferred to another facility, this time a minimum security prison farm in a remote location. "He's been reclassified as a model prisoner," Ray explained. "Apparently, he's found religion and spends most of his time in the prison library." Vincent studied the photos without emotion. "How much time does he have left?" 8 years, assuming good behavior. Linda has about 7 left on her sentence." Vincent nodded and placed the photos back in the envelope. "Any word on their post-release plans?" Trevor's been writing letters to his old Army buddies, talking about starting fresh somewhere far away. Linda's apparently planning to move in with her sister in Oregon once she's released. Both of them seem to understand that returning to this area would be inadvisable. "Good." Vincent sealed the envelope and handed it back to Ray. "File this with the others. I don't need to see any more updates unless they try to make contact." Ray understood. Vincent had moved beyond the need for ongoing revenge into the more important work of building a secure future for his son. The past was settled. What mattered now was ensuring that the future remained protected. That evening, as Vincent helped Mason with his algebra homework, his son looked up with a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. "Dad, do you ever think about what would have happened if Uncle Trevor and Mom had been different people?" Vincent set down his pen and considered the question seriously. "What do you mean? Like, if they had been good people who loved us and never tried to hurt anyone, do you think we'd still be a family?" It was a profound question for a 12-year-old, and Vincent realized that Mason was grappling with concepts of family, loyalty, and forgiveness that many adults never fully understood. "I think good people who loved us wouldn't have made the choices they made," Vincent said carefully. "Real love means protecting the people you care about, not hurting them for your own benefit." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "So they showed us who they really were by what they did." "Exactly. And now we know to build our family with people who show us through their actions that they can be trusted, like Mrs. Fitzgerald and Grandma and Uncle Ray." Vincent smiled. Ray had become like a brother to both of them, filling the role that Trevor had abandoned. Mrs. Fitzgerald had proven more maternal than Linda had ever been. Vincent's mother had stepped up as the grandmother Mason deserved. Exactly like them. Family isn't just about blood relations, Mason. It's about people who choose to love and protect each other, no matter what. Mason returned to his homework with the satisfied expression of someone who'd received an answer that made sense of his world. Vincent watched him work, marveling at the strength and wisdom his son had developed through adversity. Later that night, after Mason was asleep, Vincent sat in his study reviewing security reports and business documents. The ritual had become both practical necessity and personal meditation, a way of ensuring that the peaceful life they'd built remained protected. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your brother says hello from his new home. Asks if you've forgotten about him yet." Vincent deleted the message without responding. Someone, probably one of Trevor's fellow inmates, was trying to goad him into some kind of reaction. It was exactly the kind of desperate, pathetic move Trevor would orchestrate from prison. Vincent had not forgotten about Trevor, and he never would. But forgetting and moving on were two different things. Trevor